Great Tuesday, and welcome to the Growth Perspective Podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Kristen Eccleston. How you doing today, Dr. Eccleston?
I am doing well, King. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. And, one of the ways we like to kick things off with each show is start with the gratitude moment. So I'll let you go first. What would you say you're grateful for today?
I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to spend some quality time with my children yesterday. It was a holiday. They were off from school. My entire body hurts because I couldn't tell you the last time I had to go ice skating. But I am grateful for it, that I'm in physical health, that I could do it and spend the time with my children.
Excellent, excellent. And I'm grateful for, my life, health, ability to see, hear, walk, talk, have sound mind, breathe. I'm also grateful for. I was taking karate 2 years ago, and I got hit in my knuckle by my karate trainer in my right knuckle. And for the last since that time, I haven't been able to really make a fist fully. I didn't realize how bad he had hit me. So I just learned. I'm grateful for this last week after 2 years of learning the reason why. It's because when he hit me, he created a bone spur, and I can't fully make a feel foot until I kind of get that worked out. So I'm grateful for learning that because I didn't know. Because again, it hurt like hell. It hurt really bad when he first did it, but I didn't know to what extent that I
Yeah.
was actually damaged. So I'm grateful to learn that part.
I'm glad you found that out. Isn't it crazy how as we get older, the healing aspect is much different. And that I thought about that yesterday during ice skating too. If you fall, uh you're not going to bounce right back up like some of the other people, right? So I'm glad that
Right.
you've at least determined what it is that's going on, and hopefully that will give you a speedier recovery, because trying to heal as you get older is not as easy as it once was.
It's not, and I'm trying my best to mess up my right hand from dog bites to that. It's like, and I'm right-handed, so
Mm.
really don't want to. But just funny how the older I get, how I keep damaging my most valuable resource, being my right hand, and then I'm learning how to cope with that. But that's what I'm grateful for. So that's our gratitude moment. So I'm really interested in talking about today's topic. So why don't you kind of set the stage for us on what we're going to talk about today?
Absolutely. I'm really excited about today's conversation because I feel like it's very broad and it can be really looked at in a lot of different ways. So, today I want to talk about the concept of more than one thing being true at the same time. And you might, what does that mean? So, I had a lot of themes come up in my life recently. And whenever I see kind of repeating patterns, it makes me want to stop and reflect and try to understand it more. And in this circumstance, it was this idea of, can something be true even if it seems contradictory? Like, can you hold space for more than one truth at the same time? And today we're going to use this in context of a recent Netflix documentary, which was this hitchhiker who had essentially been kind of touted as this hero. He had saved someone from attacking someone. He was really sensationalized in the media, and I'm sure as we're talking, we'll get into more details about it. He was sensationalized in the media. He was homeless. People really wanted to rally behind him. But then he ended up in jail, and we can get to why he ended up in jail. And it's this idea: is he a killer? Is he a victim? What is he? But why can't he be more than one thing? Why can't he be a victim who's had trauma and bad things happen to him, on top of maybe being somebody who hasn't made great choices? I think oftentimes we're always trying to look at things being black or white. It fits into this category or it fits into that category, and there's no in between. But sometimes in life, there's multitudes of opportunities that we can use as an example. But sometimes in life, more than one thing can be true. You can hold space for multiple truths, even when they're being contradictory of one another. And I'll even give a personal example to kind of kick it off. And this was a thought that I had recently. My husband's grandmother passed away, and it was very, very sad. She was probably one of my favorite people in his family. I absolutely adored this woman.
My
But
condolences to you.
thank you. I appreciate that. She was 96. She had a great life. We knew it was coming, so it was definitely a celebration of life, but it was very sad to lose her. But there has been strained relationships with other people in my husband's family. And so going to the funeral, we knew we were going to have to interact and see those people. And I thought about this truth of when I was trying to have that conversation with my husband about being very stressed out about having to see these people, the idea, well, it's about my grandmother, we have to. And I thought to myself, well, it is. I am sad. I am sad about what's going on with his grandmother. That is true. I hold space for that truth. But I also hold space for the truth that I'm also very anxious that I have to go and I have to interact with people that we have had negative interactions with in the past. And it didn't make it that I was trying to negate the importance of my husband's grandmother, but I was both sad and highly anxious at the same time. So I had two truths that were happening there. And that's kind of a simple or dumbed down explanation. My dog's in the past. It's storming here, so she's hanging out with me. But that's kind of like a brought down explanation of it. But I feel like that's something that we need to talk about, because I think that's often where we get hung up as individuals, is that we have to put things in a category, and it has to fit in that category. And if it doesn't fit in that category, when there can be multiple categories, there can be multiple truths that we can hold on to. It's not always has to be a black and white situation.
Well, you're definitely saying something that's really a paradigm shift for me, because I'm a person who, I guess it's the engineer in me, but I'm always about putting things in a category. I'm always, I always use the light switch analogy. Either it's on or it's off. It's not middle ground. So it's fascinating for me to hear what you're saying, and I'm definitely looking to explore this more. So my first question would be, would you say, and this is truly out of curiosity, this ability to hold space for both thoughts, both feelings and ideas, is that gender based? I mean, would you find that more men would be more, there's no gray area, it's either black or white, or women tend to have more of it's a gray area, I can hold space for both, or does it, with your experience, does it matter?
That's a good question. I want to say from gut, and so not a lot of evidence here, but from gut, I think women do tend to be a little bit more comfortable with the gray. Let's call it the gray. But even myself, I have to even stop and think, because I think it's always natural for us, men, women, whatever you identify as, to always want to put something into a category. It's right, it's wrong, it's black, it's white, it's happy, it's sad. Like, it is one or the other, when it's not always that circumstance. And so let's jump into the documentary a little bit, because I think that will help highlight what I'm really trying to get to the root cause of with this. And so in this documentary, if people have watched it on Netflix, it's about the hitchhiker. He was in a car. He was a homeless young man. The guy who had given him a ride, we later find out that he might have provided this man with some laced marijuana. But we don't find that out until about midway through the documentary.
Right.
But at first, the guy obviously starts having hallucinations, the driver. He hits a guy with a car. I do want to say it ends up seeming like it's racially charged. The guy comes out, the hitchhiker comes out of the car, stops him, and he has like an axe, like a small kind of backpacking axe. And he essentially starts taking the axe to the guy to stop him from killing or hurting this pedestrian that he had essentially hit with his car. And the hitchhiker, I would say, is I would say early 20s. He doesn't really have, a place or anything that he hails from. Media comes upon him and starts interviewing him, and he becomes this viral sensation, more so for his kind of like over the top explanation of what he did to step in and stop the guy. He's like very animated with this. And then I smashed. So like very animated. So I think people just said, oh, here's this hero and he's animated and oh my gosh, he's homeless. He's young. What can we do? And all of a sudden, the next thing you know, different media outlets, I think like the Jimmy Kimmel show is looking for him and wants him to be on. Somebody wants to do a reality TV show with him. They really want to sensationalize this young homeless hero who stepped in and kind of saved the day. And I think the documentary does a good job of kind of painting this guy as, he'd been a little bit of a loner, they end up doing some family interviews, and you start to get a sense from these family interviews that maybe something was a little off about his childhood. Maybe there was something a little bit off about how his mother raised him. And she doesn't come, I wouldn't say right outright and say certain things, but you definitely get a feel like, oh, you locked him in his room because you needed to for his safety. But things just don't seem to match up. Like, she's saying the right things to maybe not get persecuted by the masses, but something definitely seems a little off. And you get this idea that he probably had a lot of childhood trauma associated with his upbringing. And that is probably what has led to maybe some of the mental health challenges that he's dealing with now. Because you start to realize the more time you see him in interviews and you see him interacting, there's probably definitely heavy substance use and definitely mental health and trauma that's involved. And as the documentary goes on, he ends up, I guess, getting picked up by this lawyer, this older gentleman lawyer, who I guess is a pillar of the community, ends up spending the night with him. And then the next thing you know, you see these, I guess, social media posts from him that are saying things like, would it be bad if I took things into my own hands, if I became a vigilante, if you're doing disgusting things to kids, is it wrong if I hurt you? And then that's not a direct quote, but essentially things along the lines that are kind of foreshadowing that maybe he's about to make some very drastic choices. And then you see him, there's footage or security camera that he essentially goes back to this lawyer's house, and he ends up killing him. And his whole argument when he's in with the police is that the man had essentially sexually assaulted him, drugged him. He had woken up, drugged and unsure what was going on. And it was self-defense that ultimately led to him killing this man. And it made me think that, essentially when that happened, everybody kind of shifted. He went from being this hero who was being sensationalized to, oh my gosh, he is this killer. He's got issues. He's a liar. How dare we ever trusted him? He laced the marijuana, all these different things. So we went from like holding him up here in this high regard to all of a sudden he's rock bottom. And I thought, what if he is a young man with significant childhood trauma, with substance abuse issues, who has been homeless, who has mental health needs that have never been treated, and he was sexually assaulted and he didn't know how to handle it. And please don't know. I'm not giving anybody a free pass to go out and hurt anyone by any means, but I'm trying to really think about where this young man was. And he had essentially been shifted into this spotlight, been thought that, he was wonderful and untouchable, and people are throwing money at him and opportunities at him and really, building him up, but never addressing any of the trauma or the substance or the mental health needs. It was essentially just fueling a fire, essentially, but not giving any of the support or tools necessary to contain that fire or make sure that the fire was being done in a safe way in any kind of. And then he ultimately ends up doing something unspeakable, which was taking somebody's life. And, we don't really know. Maybe he was sexually assaulted. Maybe he wasn't. But let's just go with the benefit of the doubt for this conversation that he was sexually assaulted. Could he be considered someone who is a victim? He is a victim who has had a really horrible life, who has not been provided the love, the structure, the support, the help, the guidance necessary to, to make good choices, to stand on his own 2 feet. And he really is a victim. But at the same time, he is somebody who also makes horrible choices that took somebody's life, who was irresponsible in giving laced marijuana to an individual. Can you see him as both things? Can you hold space for him being both of those things instead of just giving him the title of one or the other?
Well, thank you for setting that up. And that definitely was a very interesting documentary. And I went through a variety of thoughts about him as the documentary went on, obviously. But one of the first things that I thought that was really interesting about his personality was when he was being interviewed, when he hit the man with the hammer or the axe, and he came out and asked him, well, what are your thoughts about what would you like to share with the people? and he decided to share something very positive. You could do anything you want.
Mm-hmm.
See, that said a lot to me in the context about his behavior, how he thinks. That means he generally he wants to help people. That's his natural, as Dr. Stephen R. Covey talks about his his first whisper of conscience is to be good.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, and as you laid it out, can he have the duality of being a victim, but at the same time having space for him to, at the same time, he committed a horrible crime because of things he's gone through? I look at it as that's all a part of his whole story. Like, it's still like he still is guilty of committing the crime. Now, is it justified whether or not he uh, was sexually assaulting, like you said, for the sake of our conversation? Let's say that he was. So for me, I tend to still hold him in the same space of he's a person that has a morality of, if you do me wrong or if I see wrong being done, then it's upon me to right that wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think he may not, this is just me putting myself in his shoes, and I don't know these facts. I think he's a person who maybe didn't see anything wrong with smoking lace marijuana. Personally, like he probably would do it all the time. And most people would say, no, I want to be told that marijuana is laced.
Right.
And maybe he didn't have the rationale to think that through. He thought, well, yeah, buddy, here, smoke this with me, and that's his way of being camaraderie and things of that nature. So we can kind of look at that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what you laid out was a very interesting case. And I'm really looking forward to, what are your thoughts about, do you feel that you could hold space for both thoughts and see them in both areas?
I do. And I say this knowing that it's an unnatural feeling. Because again, I think we all of us want to put things into neat little categories. I think our brain, not even just who we are, I think our brain naturally wants to put things into little categories. Our brain is constantly trying to come up with structure and meaning. And, you hear that term, your rational mind, right? Your rational mind, your brain is trying to constantly say, okay, this is how things are. This is the way things are. And so I think it's very hard and almost unnatural when we're trying to tell our brain that, no, these multiple things can all be true, even though they seem contradictory of one another. But I do believe that things can have multiple truths. I think that he can be a victim and he can be taken advantage of and he can have trauma, but he can also be someone who is capable of doing bad things. Now, I think a separate conversation is, does that excuse him? Because I don't know that that's what I'm arguing today. But what I want to put out there is that multiple truths can be in existence at the same time. Now, do we excuse it? Do we not? That's a whole nother ethical rabbit hole. I mean, we can go down that, but I think that's separate than just at least acknowledging that multiple truths can exist at the same time, even when they're contradictory. So he can be a good person and he can be a bad person at the same time, in the sense that you're right. When he first spoke out, he gave nothing but positive messages and like, you're so capable and you're loved and like really wonderful things. And I think that was part of the charm and why people were so attracted to him. So he can give out love and positivity, but he can also take away life. And that's almost, in my mind, that's kind of polar opposite, right? Are you a positive person who loves love and wants everyone to feel great? Or are you a cold-hearted killer? Can you be both at the same time? Is it in an ethical dilemma? Is it a rationale dilemma? Like, where do we define that line? And we all have we all have ethics. These are our ethics. This is our right and this wrong. Where is that fine line as a society? And how do we know when it's being crossed and when it's not? Because really, we as a society have defined what our ethics are. And then we as individuals kind of have offshoots of those ethics.
That's really interesting. I look at it as can you be a good person who does bad things, as opposed to being either or?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's how I tend to view it. Like, I think overall, he's a good person, but I think that even when he became famous, he still was a victim because he just was used by the media.
100%.
So he was used pretty much his entire life. Like you said, well, whether that justifies whether or not he was warranted in doing the crime, or does it, get him off or vindicate him for the crime. But at the same time, I believe that if you were to give him an opportunity and the right mentors, the right guidance, the right people around him, I think he would choose the right thing, as opposed to a person who would choose what's in his own best self-interest, regardless of the situation,
Mhm.
regardless of circumstances. They're going to choose what's in their best interest, period. I think he went with what's in his best knowledge as far as what he knew what was best. It's like using your analogy just real quick about your dog, right? If you don't train your dog properly, your dog is going to do what his normal instinct is.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to train the dog not to mean that the dog constantly comes in and tears at your curtains and urinates on the floor. And you say, that bad dog. Is it really a bad dog? Or is it just because the dog hasn't been trained properly or given a love and guidance to make sure that he can make better decisions? He or she can make better decisions. That's how I kind of look at it in that perspective.
I think that's valid. Let me ask you this. So in the documentary, when he goes to the man's house that he ultimately murdered, he goes this first night and I think he texts something. There's some kind of documentation social media wise that he essentially alludes that there was a sexual assault that took place that first night. Then he leaves that house and he goes, I think, to a train station, and you see this security camera footage of him there with the man who supposedly sexually assaulted him. You see him buying him essentially like a train ticket. There's a hug of an exchange, like a thank you hug exchange. And then I think something, I don't remember, but it was like something he was supposed to go somewhere or someone was supposed to pick him up and they didn't. And so he called back that man and asked to come back to the house. And that's when he goes back to the house, supposedly is sexually assaulted for a second time, and then commits the crime of murdering this man. And so in my mind, what made him go back? What made him go back to a house where if he felt like he had been a victim or this unjust thing had happened, did he go back because he didn't have anywhere else to go? Did he go back because he had more time to think about what had happened to him and he felt justified in his actions of killing this man because of what had happened to him? Why did a second sexual assault happen? Did he know that he ran that risk, but having some place to sleep and something to eat was more important? And I get that, we all have survival needs, and in desperation, I think any person will do what they need to do to survive. I think we've seen that in history. The Dahmer Party is a great example of that. So I'm not ever going to judge somebody for what they had to do to survive. But in this circumstance, what made him go back to this house, essentially deal with a second sexual assault? Because I think had it only happened once and he killed the man, not that I would be more sympathetic, but I think I could see more in the heat of the moment. You woke up, you were disoriented, you realized what happened to you. It was unjust. You acted in rage and it happened. But to go to the train station, to have this like friendly embrace goodbye, to then choose to go back. I'm not saying that my mind is made up. I think if anything, I'm still trying to process all of this information, but that piece is kind of what made my brain start spinning of the why go back? What is it that makes you go back? Are you still a victim? Is that the mental health piece? Is that the trauma piece? Is that a survival piece? What is it that would make you go back? And then is it considered that you did kill him in cold blood? It was there was a motive behind it because you chose to go back and put yourself in that situation. Because I think that's a lot of what's kind of hurting him right now, or where that documentary ended, is kind of leaving you as the viewer to kind of determine how you feel about him. But to me, there's still so many loose ends brain processing wise to try to figure out, how do you feel about this person? And is that because there are multiple truths to this story?
Well, see, My perspective is that goes back to the question of being convicted by a jury of your peers, right? See, your peers are not homeless people who are going through that same situation. They're not going to relate to it
That's true.
because the rational mind says, "Yeah, I'm just going to get out of there because you have choices, you have options. Why would you go back?" But if
Yeah.
you're someone who's used to living as a homeless person, sleeping in cars, and whatever else the street life throws at you, and you have this individual who does some bad things to you, but does some good things to you as well. Because in his space, in his mind, he's holding that this person is a good person who's doing bad things to me. So maybe I can go back and it won't be so bad this time. And I much rather live with him or stay with him tonight than to be out there in the unknown or whatever else live on the street is going to enroll me in this moment. So I kind of see when I watched it, I kind of put in their perspective that he put it in because when he made those posts that showed that he was thinking like maybe I should get out of here, and a rational person would have left. Like if I don't leave, I'm gonna end up killing him. But again, when you're a person who's gone through the mental health that you talk about before, he's gone through the trauma. He's not as rational as someone who has not gone through those things. He's
Mhm.
someone who's used to living on the streets and dealing with all the consequences and pain and suffering that living on the street brings you. That you can now justify in your mind. I can go back to a situation even though it's not great, but it's better than being on the street, and maybe this person won't assault me, and maybe I can defend myself. Maybe I can talk to him. See, we don't know if went back and had a conversation with him to say, "This don't do this to me," and the man did it to me again and forced his hand. I tend to look at it. I give him the benefit of the doubt because of the fact is he initially got into a situation that was not that he didn't have to be involved with, and he came to someone else's aid, and he put himself at risk to do that. And so to me, that's how I kind of view him. I put him in that context. That's the box I put him in. And I didn't really take him out of that box because of that situation. I kind of said, I still hold him there. And I could be all wrong. I mean, there could be facts that shows no, he was just a killer at the end of the day. And he warrants to be locked up. But my intuition is to say I really give him the benefit of the doubt.
And I'm glad you put that perspective, being the growth perspective. I'm glad you put that perspective out there because you're right. I don't know that I had thought about that. And you're right. I probably was looking at it from more of a rational mind than from his point of view. And I think what you said is incredibly valid. But I still think that still creates this idea of there being two truths, that he
Hmm.
is a victim, that he is somebody that the system, that family, that the society had brushed off into a corner, and he was a victim. But I still think that some of what happened to him that made him a victim still puts him in that category of him not having the ability to make good choices, and therefore he has done bad things. Now, do I think that makes him a bad person? I don't think that makes him a bad person, but he's obviously still a dangerous person. And maybe those are two truths too. You don't
Hmm.
have to be a bad person, but you can still be a dangerous person, because if your mental health is not in check, or that trauma is not in check, then you have I guess you're more susceptible for things like what he did to have happen. And again, not saying that makes him a bad person, but it does make him capable of bad things. But it's because all those litany of other things have not been addressed. So that's why I think that there's this concept that there are multiple truths that can exist at one time. And even beyond just this documentary, I think if we want to look at all the things that are happening in the world, society, politics, religion, whatever, there can be multiple truths. You can not agree with something, but you don't have to be against it at the same time, too. And I think that comes down to people feeling, oh, you need to be involved. You have to pick a side, but that's somebody's view, or that's somebody's opinion that is getting forced upon you. So that's why I think we, again, are trying to always be in this world where we're putting things into these neat, clean little buckets, And there's not always this neat little clean bucket to put in. Sometimes multiple truths exist. And I think that's sometimes where we get hung up when we're having conversations with individuals or with different people. It's those little things that we're afraid to say, like, I believe this, but I also believe that, because somebody's afraid that if that I believe this other aspect, does that make me a bad person? Does that make me, ignorant? Does it make me have a fixed mindset? Does it make me just not have enough information? But I think we're always afraid to kind of be honest with ourselves about these multiple truths, because we know that everybody wants to put things in this clean bucket. I think it would be easy to say, yeah, he's not a bad person. He's not bad at all. But again, he's not a bad person, but he is capable of bad things. And that can't be glossed over, because I feel like to gloss that over glosses over the whole aspect of his life that has been neglected, which includes that trauma and that mental health piece.
Yeah, you definitely gave me something to look at it there. Now I can see where I can have two opposing thoughts in my mind about him now. Because when you say, because I kept looking at him as a good person that may have done bad things. But when you say he's a good person, but he's dangerous, it's like, now. Yeah. So if he's dangerous, then he does not need to be on the streets, because he might not make rational decisions. So that makes him dangerous. So even though he is a good person with a good heart, they can make some irrational decisions that can be destructive to other people in society, then that warrants him having to not be on the streets. Maybe in a mental institution, and that's more of your area, but that's what I would look for. Me being the system engineer looking for the solution, I'm always gonna, look for a single solution. But to your point, when you were saying about even beyond the documentary, the first person that came to my mind is Donald Trump, right? Because and it's not just the fact of getting into his politics and all those things. Mm-hmm. It's how people can say on one hand he was racist, but then he was doing things for certain Black people that was helpful. And that to me was like, that doesn't really make sense, because that's shattering the idea of a racist person to me. A racist person is not going to do anything helpful to anybody that they feel that they don't like. Mm-hmm. They're not going to help someone. So I think that's a very interesting perspective. That's why I'm glad we have this conversation, because now I have to be much more mindful of when I look at someone, and my instinct is to judge them based off the narrative I've been told. Mm-hmm. But if I really begin to sit back and say, well, I'm not going to, and that's what I've really been working on as I get older, as I look at myself in the growth perspective, is to focus on not judging the person, but judging the behaviors.
Can I actually tell you a story associated with that I did? Absolutely. That just came to mind? And so I'm deviating a little bit, but I love this story because I feel like this is a really good story for everyone to hear. I had a student many years ago who, I won't say his name because I don't want to do that to him, but he had a nickname called the Virus. Like, his name rhymed, it was something, the Virus. And that's what teachers referred to him as. And I started at the high school he graduated from his freshman year. And I didn't work directly with him his freshman year, but he definitely built up a reputation very quickly. If it went broken, stolen, something that went wrong in the school building, most likely he was associated with it, hands down. And so his reputation spread very quickly throughout that building. And, and teachers, even if they hadn't taught him, they knew who he was, they knew what he was about. And his junior year of high school, I ended up getting him on my caseload. And so I was a special education teacher, and he had I think a mild learning disability. He was on the football team. Nobody would have known type of thing that he was in special education. And I say that to clear up, because I think oftentimes people hear special ed and they have assumptions of what special ed looks like, when most of the time kids who have IEPs, nobody even knows that they're in special education. And he was one of those kids. And he was put on my caseload. And I loved this kid, but I learned some things about him right off the bat. I remember calling his mother that first day of school just to introduce myself as the case manager. His mother answered the phone, And essentially, her first words were, "What did he do now?" And my heart just shattered and broke because all I was doing was calling this mother to introduce myself. And it hit me that this mother had never once received a positive phone call about this child. Not once. It was always, he did this. And most of the time, I mean, to be fair, he usually probably had done something, but that's all she was ever getting phone calls about. I mean, I had teachers come to me when he first got put on my caseload and told me that, you know, that's awful. You don't want to have him. You don't want to work with him. His family is awful to deal with. Like, his father hates women. He's going to be so disrespectful to you. Like, I got the whole gambit of different things from staff. But ultimately, I don't know what it was about this kid. I just really liked him. I thought he had a great personality. I liked him. I would go out up to bat for him with teachers, and I would go to teachers and I would say stuff to them like, could you do this for this kid? Could you give him this extra chance? Could you give him some for him? No, like it just immediately, as soon as they knew who the kid was, there was like no way that they were going to give this kid any extra time, any breaks, nothing. And it really hit me hard. And it made me realize how much and this is kind of going back to what you said a few minutes ago that made me trigger this story. We have these mindsets, and oftentimes we share our mindsets, especially in the education world. This kid, oh my gosh, you don't want to have this kid. This kid does this. And then before you even taught this kid, you end up with this mindset of this child. You end up judging this child for who they're going to be. And then they become this self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, oftentimes. And to find out this young man happened to be Middle Eastern. He was in elementary school the time September 11th happened, or 9/11 happened. And he had always felt that teachers and peers had judged him. And I know this because I read his college essay, and he went into deeps about how, people perceived him and how he was treated after that, and how it almost kind of created this persona that he started to give off. But his junior year, again, I loved this kid. I don't know why. I loved this kid. Whatever he needed, I would always do what I could to make it happen. And even if that meant getting into arguments with other teachers. And by the end of his junior year, he was a straight A honor roll student. And I ended up having to leave the school for his senior year. I went to a different teaching position, and it broke my heart because I wish I had been there for his senior year. But I stayed in touch with him. I was only at like the next high school over type of thing. If he got on a roll, he loved fried chicken from this place. I would bring it down to him. And I loved this kid. And I reminded him how brilliant and smart he was. And now he works in the government doing cybersecurity. I mean, I couldn't be more proud of this kid. But it's always been a lesson to me of how impactful it is when we make these predeterminations of who somebody is, because he had been doing bad things. I'm not excusing him. He had been doing bad things in that school building, and he built up a reputation. But teachers, and that's what kills me the most, teachers should be the most like welcoming, open arms, love you no matter what, conditional love. But they weren't. Immediately they had this idea of who this kid was, and this kid became this self-fulfilling prophecy. And it showed that as soon as this kid got one person, I think it was myself and one other who like believed in him and supported him, he did a complete 180. And it just took 1-2 people's belief and standing up and saying, I don't agree. This isn't who this kid really is. And showing him that he all of a sudden, I mean, it was like a night and day difference that just happened overnight, it felt like. And I feel like I share that story because I think it's so powerful for people to hear that oftentimes we get so engrossed in what we hear about other people and how we think other people, and really take other people's opinions at face value without taking the opportunity to really create our own opinion or our own feelings towards an individual and determine, is this person's truth, or have they almost become a self-fulfilling prophecy because this is the only truth that people will allow them to have?
Absolutely. And you're right. See, in that story, and I can think of stories where personally myself, a teacher who believes in you can change everything. I mean, that can put you on a whole different trajectory as far as how you're thinking and how you see yourself. It really can have that kind of impact in your life and your thinking. And that's why I say for me, and I've gotten older, the older I get, and it's a battle. but I'm always looking to say I'm going to judge a person's behaviors
Mhm.
and not judge the individual. Because depending on the circumstances, and if a person's, not principle centered, the circumstances can drive that person's behavior in that moment. Like again, a homeless person who comes to the aid of someone selfishly and saves a life can also be the same person that can kill someone else years later. You
Mhm.
know, now the questions now begin to ask: what if he had someone like you in his life who began to work with him after the incident and really begin to mold him and shape him and really begin to help form a better rational mind? Would he had a different trajectory down the road? Because as documentary pointed out, his mother would put him in a room.
Yeah.
So he wasn't used to any kind of love or support or anyone really coming to his aid. And as we know how the media does, they only want to use you for their benefit. I just want to get clicks. I want people to watch my show. I know that Jimmy Kimmel's a nice guy, but I've watched him a lot of times just, because it's going to get views, grab the hottest topic right now and
Yeah.
have him on the show and give that person that 15 minutes of fame, ask them questions, and then they're done.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Jimmy Kimmel should be at fault for that. That's really how the Hollywood machine rolls. But by the same token, he's not taking into consideration the impact that has on that person's self-esteem, especially a homeless person that has. Because again, I tell folks, when you look at the word homeless, you've actually taken the person's identity away just in that alone. You're not calling them by their name. They're not John Jones. They're homeless.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have an address, you lose your identity. So here you are for the first time now having people see you as a human being again. And what does that really mean? And if you never had lost your identity, you don't really know the magnitude of what that can do to your psyche now to have people begin to start seeing you as a human being again and interact with you and then ask your opinion about things.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people are going to stop and ask a homeless person what they really think about something and literally listen to what the person's answer about it? So all that is going on, and I believe in that young man's mind. And you add on to that the mental trauma of how he was raised. You don't know what person you're really dealing with, but that's why I think it's so important to really make sure you have the right people around them to really shape and mold. Again, look at Kanye West and how there's a duality about him, right?
Oh yeah.
To this day, some people will still defend him and say, well, mental health issues, but Kanye tried to find some good in Hitler,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I don't think that you can find any good in Hitler, right? That's a person that we all know what he did, but my point is, it's funny how different people can see a person who's committed certain behaviors and see a whole different perspective on that person, depending on how they interact, how they met this person, how this person's impacted their lives, and what they believe true heart lies.
And I think a lot of that comes back to, and we've talked about this on this show a lot before, is that idea of personal bias. I think we all see people differently to some degree and are willing to either excuse or not excuse behaviors based on our own personal biases. What have we gone through? What have we seen? What have we had family members go through? What does our upbringing look like? And I think that's where we either allow grace or don't allow grace, is because it was either given to us, wasn't given to us. We've either been exposed to this idea or concept or haven't. And I don't know that people recognize how powerful personal biases are. And personal biases, and I'm kind of being a repetitive record here, but if this is your first time listening to us, I think personal biases are incredibly important because they're not a bad thing. They're not this bad thing. It's who you are. You can't control what you have been exposed to since birth. You've just been exposed to what you've been exposed to since birth. But where I feel like personal biases become a bad thing is when they've been brought to your attention and then you still choose not to learn more or not to hear a different perspective. Like, for example, when you were sharing with me the idea that, I hadn't really put myself in his shoes and thought that, I was like, you're right. I hadn't. That changed my mind in an instant because I was there and listening to what you had to say. And I allowed that information to shift my point of view and my thinking. And I think that's what the growth perspective is, right? That's what a growth mindset is. And I think that's why this concept of true truths, or even more than two truths, is important because they can exist, they do exist, but it's this idea of needing to be open to knowing that there's limitations to what you have experienced in your life. And we do need to rely on each other because, as a collective, we've all had all the experiences. And so we have to rely on each other's perspectives and experiences and allow them to provide this level of growth in our understanding of the world and of people.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's where the whole purpose of our show, to grow perspective, is, again, if a person is seeking to become like myself, self mastery is my goal. I know I'll never get there. It's like a journey that has no destination at the end. I mean, no ending. I'm sorry for the journey, but I'm committed to the journey.
Yeah.
I'm committed to growing and learning. And again, one of my prayers that I make each day is that I could be a better listener than I was the previous day. I could be more mindful, I could be more patient, I could be more understanding than I was the day before. And that's what I pray every single day for, that guidance. I could be more open-minded. And I'm reading and learning so I can continue to grow, because I want to be what I call a fully human. I want to see myself as a human being having and not some group dynamic that they put us in here, these tribes they put us in. So I think that's where, to your point about personal bias, my issue with the personal bias thing is you have to begin to grow beyond your personal bias.
Yes.
Once you recognize that you have a personal bias, and to your point, we all do. Because the other gentleman who I do a podcast with, Reggie, he talks about in his book Cultural Givings. What are your cultural givings that you were given as a kid? And like, we learn certain things, like you learn that white men can't jump. And you learn that's a cultural giving. and I mention that right now because the NBA just had an All-Star weekend, and the gentleman who won the slam dunk contest was a white kid. So he did the most electrifying dunk. So again, just proving that whole concept. But that's a cultural given that has lived. And I'm almost, I shouldn't say almost, I am in my 50s now. So that's where we got to begin to start seeing each other as human beings and get beyond this whole group dynamics. So I think as long as we see each other in the group dynamics and begin to put folks, even homeless is a group dynamic.
Yeah.
Because now you're grouping all the people who are homeless and you put them in the same barrel. And you're saying they all suffer for the same reasons. Like, they just fell on hard times. They're lazy. They're bums. They don't want to change their lives. And it's a whole litany of reasons why somebody may actually be on the streets. Some people may opt out of the system. They just don't want to be in the system. They don't want to have a job, but they're content to surviving just that day. And then there's other folks who actually may truly fell on hard times, and they really do need someone to listen to them and give them a helping hand and be patient and guide them along the way.
But it's always been, I think, us as a society, as a group, as a whole, we've always wanted to put things, again, it's those buckets. Look at even when immigration was, first happening here in the United States, right? And you look in major cities, you had Chinatown, you had, all the Italians lived in one place, all the Polish people lived in one place, all the Irish lived in one place. Everyone created groups because they wanted to be with people who were like-minded, that was very stagnant because there wasn't a lot of opportunity for growth and perspective there, because you just surrounded yourself with individuals who essentially had the same ideologies and socio-cultural understandings as you. And because that, in a sense, made you feel safe and secure because there wasn't anything different, right? But different, I think, is often associated with fear, but it shouldn't be. Different is an opportunity to learn, for deeper understanding, for growth, for bringing in new perspectives, for essentially, in my opinion, for us as a society, as a world, to grow, to create, to do better, to, cure diseases, to, change population and climate change and all that, because we have to bring in these different perspectives. It's very stagnant in this idea if we just stay to what feels safe and what we know and what is secure. And again, that goes back to brain. We've talked about that. That's a survival. Your brain goes, I don't want things to be different. I don't want things to change. I'm alive right now. And if I'm alive, then why mess with things? But in reality, we're not in a world where we have to worry about saber-toothed tigers at the watering hole and having to remember that negative experience anymore. We're now in this other type of world, but our brain doesn't know that. Our brain is still wired the way it's always been wired. So we have to essentially use that higher level of, or that thinking brain instead of that animalistic brain to say, hey, no, we're okay. It's okay to change things up. It's okay to think differently. It's okay to bring in different perspectives and different ideas and people who are different, because that's how we grow and that's how we make things stronger, because we bring in these new perspectives. And I think that can be applied to so many different things, corporate culture, work culture, religion, politics, whatever. We get very stagnant because we're afraid of different and change, when we really should be embracing it and saying, how do we incorporate everyone's perspective to have a new way of thinking or a different outlook?
Absolutely. And that's kind of one of the things that I focus on now as a connector. And I advocate that one of the biggest false narratives that we believe in this country, or maybe even the world, is the importance of connecting with people with whom we have things in common with. And that's where we go back to the group dynamics, right? As someone who's Black, my neighbor who grows up in my Black neighborhood may also like the same foods I like, the same music that I like, may be interested in the same television programs. We have those things in common.
Mm-hmm.
But I advocate what's more important when you're making connections is not what's in common, what's in alignment. And so, because alignment is more intrinsic, your values, your principles, your purpose in life. And that goes beyond the person's color, their skin, their gender, their sexual orientation, or any of those things. So I have more things in alignment with a white woman in Albania than I do a Black man next door to me in Baltimore City.
Mm-hmm.
And that's who I rather build and connect with. And I advocate folks build their own tribes, what I call connectionally intelligent tribes of people who you're in line with. And that's a much more powerful connection than living with and working with things with people you have in common. I mean, I don't know how many relationships you had before you got married. I know I've had dozens of relationships. People always introduce me or try to match me and say, you got so much in common with her. And then I date her and we don't get along because we have nothing in alignment.
Yeah.
We like the same music, same age, grew up in the same era, but we don't see eye to eye on what is at the core of who I am as an individual, which is my purpose in life.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that makes a lot of sense, that you're right. There is this alignment piece, and sometimes the people who we have the most in common with, we're not in alignment with, because it's more than just interest, right? It's that core, the conversations we've had today, the opportunity to think outside for a different perspective. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that, because again, it's scary. It is, I think we have these conversations very openly, but I think because you and I, and we've discussed this, are in alignment of wanting to see things in a new. I'm always want the aha moment. I always want somebody to change my mind. I want to see it differently. Like, please give me a perspective that I hadn't thought about. I actually find that to be incredibly exciting when I get a new perspective that I hadn't thought about. I love that. But a lot of people don't. And so you're right. That alignment piece can very easily be off. I can like all the same things as somebody, but if they're not willing to go for that aha or seeking an aha, then I probably wouldn't be in alignment with them. And I probably wouldn't enjoy spending as much time with them, because we're not on that same page. We're not trying to seek the same bigger truths in life. And I think that's important for people to recognize too, that it's more than just having things in common. It is that alignment piece with individuals.
And so as we reach this point of the show, what are some ways that you feel that people can begin to examine their personal bias as it relates to honoring multiple truths?
I think the first thing that you can do, and just to make this an easier task, and that way it can be applied to a lot of different things, is just start to think about either people or things in your lives that you have not necessarily experienced, right? Maybe it's a neighbor friend that has told you, like, oh, you don't want to talk to that neighbor. They are just absolutely out of their mind. Like, I can't stand them. They're horrible. You won't like them. And because you get along well with that particular neighbor, you take that at face value. Maybe next time go, okay, thanks for sharing that with you, but make it so that you gain that perspective for yourself. Make sure that you expose yourself to that person, you speak to them, you have opportunities so that you can gain your own perspective on who that person is, or are you in alignment or disagreement with them? Because maybe the friend that you get along with doesn't get along with them, and that's okay. But maybe you do. Maybe you are in alignment with that person. And the truth is, you can be friends with both of those people, even if they don't connect with one another. And so I challenge people to start taking their own perspectives or making their own ideas, perspectives. I think oftentimes we want to hear what other people say. We take it at face value, and then we just accept that as the truth without really having done the work ourselves to determine if that's our truth.
Hmm. I think that's definitely very valuable, especially in today's world where we're living in, quote Noam Chomsky, the um, the actually uh, I just lost it right when I was about to say it. The manufacturing of consent is where I was going with this, where the media manufactures what we think and what we're supposed to think and how we're supposed to respond. And they sensationalize things based off what generates the initial interest,
Mhm.
regardless of how it may impact other people. I mean, to think about the fact that Netflix, which I do enjoy watching a lot of documentaries, but now they have more documentaries about serial killers and murderers than I've ever seen before.
Yeah.
And it's always from the perspective of giving this interest in the serial killer.
Yeah.
And
Not
it's easy to watch that because the serial killer didn't impact anybody in my life.
Yeah.
But if my loved ones or someone in my life who was close to me had been killed by this person, I'm not gonna want to watch a documentary and have this person examined and they try to make this person look human and all these things. So that's why I say at the end of the day, you have to really think about this statement here, which is either you are operating off your own plan or you operating off someone else's plan.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're operating off someone else's plan, that plan is never going to be in your best interest.
100% agree with that. 100%. It's always going to be best for you to do the work of making your own decisions, your own determinations, and being okay with it might change. Be okay with that too. That mindset that you have now, or that determination you make now, could change, and that's okay. That's transformation learning.
Absolutely. And everybody should be committed to having a growth mindset.
Mm.
What can you do to be a better person tomorrow than you were today? A better husband, a better wife, a better father, a better son, a better, sister, a better brother, a better owner. I always pray to be a bit more understanding, and I continue to increase my knowledge about owning a dog and being a better leader for my dog, because I realize I'm learning so much more about me. Like, I'm a much different person as it relates to compassion now as a result of having a dog than I was 7 months prior. I'm much more patient. I'm much more understanding than I was. And a dog helps you see that, because for the first time, you deal, at least for me, I'm dealing with someone or something that does not have the attitude of harboring their past. Dogs live in the moment. They don't care about what happened last week. You have to come by and apologize. I'm still sorry for what I did last week, as we do with human beings. Dogs live in the moment. Well, how you treat me right now, or you treat me well right now, the energy that you're giving off, is it love right now? And that's what I'm rolling with. And that has taught me so much about my growth perspective.
I love that. I think that's a great way to end it. I couldn't have said it better.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Eccleston, for bringing the topic and helping us really think through honoring multiple truths. You helped me understand that there can be multiple truths when now I'm really going to begin to examine that going forward in my thinking. Because again, I was definitely someone that was hard pressed, fixed mindset, which I hate to admit, on the fact that it was either on or off. But that's the purpose of the show. I love to learn. I love to grow.
I love it. Well, thank you, King.
And I want to thank our listening audience for listening to the Growth Perspective again. And we will be back at our normal time, the first Monday of the month, starting in March.
Yes.
So look forward to having others join us and subscribe and learn more. Click the notification link so you can find out when we're dropping our next show. And hope everybody can really begin to understand that the Growth Perspective is really to help us as individuals learn to be better human beings. And I want to thank everybody for their time. And again, Dr. Eccleston, thank you for your investment of time and energy today as well.
Thank you, King.
Take care, everyone.